Well, I hope everybody had a good Christmas, firstly. Um, as you can see, the title of this episode is Martial Law, Really. Um, I had some other things I wanted to go over on this broadcast, but it seems that the web is flooded with videos and articles about the impending martial law taking place. Now, I don't know. I can't say if the president were to enact martial law. That just is like, I mean, clearly it'd have to be something pretty serious, but, you know, in theory, right? Well, I just wanted to like clarify some things about martial law. So what I did was I just went to Google and Googled martial law. And the dictionary definition is military government involving the suspension of ordinary laws. Now, that means that the hierarchy of the military supersedes that of the agencies and hierarchy of the alphabet soup, so to speak. The non-executive functions of government as well. Uh, so what it really means is that the military itself will be the reigning body over the land, and you will be subject to its laws, its curfews, its whatever. So, okay, on the surface, that doesn't necessarily sound all that bad. You got to be honest with what that means, because if you've spent time in the military, you know what it is to be under that hierarchy. With a chain of command and subject to the UCMJ, Uniform Code of Military Justice. So it's not like it's in the onset. It's not like, I mean, there's the potential we don't see things like tanks in the streets and stuff like that. Like, will the military enforce the laws that are held by the local governments? Yes, they'll enforce those laws, and they'll probably enforce a few others that might make life more difficult. Um, but I don't necessarily see this sudden. Well, I don't know if it's sudden necessarily, but I don't. I don't necessarily see martial law being enacted as something that is uh, necessarily a bad thing. Now, if they, it depends on how far it goes, really. if the military starts controlling or micromanaging some of the civilian functions, then that aren't like necessary, like the resupply of food and maintaining the supply chains throughout the country and interstate, then I mean those things are of course going to happen. But if martial law is enacted, but if they start telling you, you gotta, like, if for instance, if they confiscate weapons, that's going to be a big problem. Because martial law or not, everybody has the inherent right to self-defense. Everybody. If and here's where there's some gray areas where the typically lawful individual becomes lawless or outlawed because he needs maybe more rations of food than the next person, or he can't get his or she can't get his or her medications or the things that she needs to function or he needs to function on a daily basis, or they're not treating the wounded for whatever reason effectively. Because the issue with one government kind of transposing itself over another is you end up with a break in the supply chain typically, and it has to be restructured, and then with that you lose your typical local capacities. Um, Hospitals will be out for a period of time. The resupply of food local to local areas will be uh, suppressed for a certain amount of time. Um, it would take time for these things to be under functional control of the military. Everybody on the internet, I guess, is saying, oh, well, it's the end, or it's a new beginning, or it's whatever, whatever. Like they look at martial law like it's never happened before. And we fought a civil war, and the military was the government. It had to be in order to fight off the South. Um, look that up. The country was under martial law from 1972 to 1981. Oh, that's the wrong country. Let's say that's in the Philippines. September 15th, 1863, President Lincoln. Yeah, that makes more sense. He authorized martial law. The authorizing act allowed the president to suspend habeas corpus throughout the entire United States, which he had already done under his own authority on April 27th, 1861. And habeas corpus is where they can detain you indefinitely. Um, It's another one to know. Habeas corpus. A writ requiring a person under arrest to be brought before a judge or into a court, especially to secure the person's release unless lawful grounds are shown for their detention. So suspending that means they don't go before a judge or into a court. They get detained for whatever the reason is. Now, could things get stupid and a kid steals rations from a military supply truck, 5-ton or something like that, deuce and a half, and or at a resupply point, and he grabs a couple extra MREs, and then they throw him in detention for God knows how long. Like, yeah, that could happen. That would be unfortunate, especially if he's trying to feed a sick mother or something like that, and she needs more to eat than the rest of them, or sick father or sick brother or family member. Doesn't matter. Like those are those gray areas where I was saying the lawful become outlaws. So, and what I'm discussing are the more practical things. Now, I mentioned that time frame in which the supply chain's broken. During that time frame, while the military transitions from governing itself to governing its citizens, you could see a variety of unlawful acts take place, and the rebelliousness of the people could show itself. I don't mean all people, I mean those out there that know who they are. If they're rebellious now, groups like Antifa and stuff like that, then yeah, they're going to be acting out during a potential military takeover of our government, because a lot of them are very much anti-military. So they'll have their role to play. In which case you could see the mobilization of the military in order to quell any violence or factions that aren't acting in the best interest of the public. In which case you might see tanks on the streets as a deterrent. And you'll see military police and infantry units patrolling the streets. In that scenario, it may take longer because resources are being spread farther. As an example, instead of committing troops to physical labor and stuff like that needs to be done, they're instead patrolling the streets to stem any kind of violence or uprising within the local population. you could see a pretty heated situation. You could see uh, what I would consider, almost blue on blue violence. Um, there is plenty of units out there that have trained for riot control and um, certainly counterinsurgency should that arise. Um, so I guess what I'm getting at is like if you look at worst case scenario, yeah, things could look pretty bleak during that time frame that the supply chain's broken and things aren't back online and people aren't getting fed and people aren't getting the assistance they need in order to survive uh, during a takeover like that. But it it doesn't necessarily have to get to the point where there's 5,000, 10,000 people in the streets throwing Molotov cocktails or something like that. Now, can that happen? Yeah, it can. Is it likely? I don't know. You be the judge. It's not something we've seen in a while. I mean, the military and National Guard units and stuff like that have been deployed for anything from natural disasters to the escorting of, school children to school during the civil rights era. Um, so it's possible to see troops on the streets. Um, I I think the majority of people out there are just going to want to get it over with and get things back online so there can be some normalization in their life. So they'll be willing to cooperate with the military. Because that's what it comes down to. Either you cooperate or you don't. There's some gray area, but there's not a lot, and and the gray area isn't necessarily good. Um, we've had I'll give you again. I always go back to my experiences in Iraq. Um, we've had plenty of cases where the local population, one thing happens and it leads to another or something, and you know, the like you don't just detain somebody that's a suspected terrorist and their family or relative or whatever, not be up in arms about it. You know what I'm saying? So you'll see those kinds of things where people may get detained, and then it fuels more violence. Um, that can happen in a martial law situation where it becomes a slippery slope, and then what the military came there to do, which should be to govern the people and serve them, uh, should be to govern the people and serve them, and instead they end up exacerbating the situation and it leading to more conflict and potentially armed resistance. Now, I'm going to go back to Googling martial law. Thank you. Let's see here. Let's search conditions for martial law. So it says, especially in response to a temporary emergency, such as an invasion or major disaster, or in an occupied territory. Now, it states temporary emergency. And it says invasion or major disaster. Invasion is an interesting one because it could be defined two ways. A force that is arriving, that could be trying to occupy territory within the United States, or it could be a force that's breeding with the populace in order to train their offspring to take over and change the government, to grow up and live certain lifestyles that then contribute to the change of the laws within the government, within the country. So you kind of have like these two different types of invasions. One is more long term, one is, short term or immediate. That's the latter of those two is a clever one because it's been done before, but there's been much smaller nations than the United States in the far distant past that have been bred out of existence or have collapsed because of its lack of structure or failure to meet the standards of the population, and they've moved on, or in some cases probably starved. Well, there has been countries that have failed because they've literally starved their people out during the Cold War. But The one to be interested in is the phrase temporary emergency. It does, so it doesn't even have to be anything that is of sheer magnitude. It could be, I hate to say this, but it could be the cleaning up of members of federal agencies that could be considered enemies of the state. So that's something to take into consideration. Hold on one second. Be right back. All right, I'm back. So let's look up some other interesting phrases here. Some things to know. Continuity of government is the principle of establishing defined procedures that allows the government to continue its essential operations in case of a catastrophic event such as a nuclear war. The need for continuity of government plans gained new urgency with nuclear proliferation. So let's take catastrophic event, and it immediately goes to the far extreme and says such as nuclear war. And look that up. Something catastrophic is very harmful or disastrous. Okay, we know that. When the stock market crashes, it's a catastrophic event for investors. This is a strong word for terrible, harmful, devastating things. Tornadoes, hurricanes, earthquakes, and tsunamis are catastrophic weather events. A depression is catastrophic for the economy. So this is a little more descriptive. We've had tornadoes, hurricanes.
Really, Meow Meow? You just broke your toy. This Meow Meow.
Okay, bud.
We'll have to glue it back together, Meow Meow. So now you want to play with this.
But those things are relatively annual, and there hasn't been the reason for something like continuity of government to go into place. Now, it has on local levels, but that's more like the government, oh, wow, we've got to do our job, instead of uh, martial law. But there's a connection. The connection is simply put one word: crisis. A time of intense difficulty, trouble, or danger. Crisis could be a catastrophic event. It could be a national emergency. So quite literally, martial law could be put into place for anything. Stock market crash, power outage, earthquake, hurricane, tornadoes. uh, an epidemic of some kind. Um, any emergency. And everybody's talking about stock market crashing. The signs point to that, and I'm not an expert on any of that, so I don't. I understand there's some volatility in the market. Um, and some people point to the possibility of a kind of financial reset. All I'm doing here is just kind of going over like what it could be like, what it could be the reasons, and these things are beat to death on the internet. Um, but what's interesting is that there there are a lot of people on the web that are saying martial law is going to happen, and that it's going to be kicked off by these tribunals that the military is going to hold. That they're going to round up a bunch of folks, kind of cleanse the government a little bit. Not that it doesn't need cleansing, because where there's corruption, there's corruption. It's up and down the food chain. So But what we have to deal with is the more interesting aspect of it all. It's going to be different in the bigger cities than it will be in the rural areas. There's going to be a lot more attention to the cities. Because if you can't tell by the way the buildings are designed, they're either, in some cases, borderline medieval looking to 40-story or greater holding cells with only one way in or out. Or maybe not one way in or out, but one major point of entry. So there's some things to think of. That's another thing about urban survival and during a conflict or something like that. It's a good idea to stay out of skyscrapers in cities. Because unless you got a helicopter, the first thing that they're going to do is block your way out. Like, and then they're just going to train fire on you. And if they don't get you, then it becomes a battle of attrition. You either run out of ammo before they do, or you don't. But yeah, it's a good idea to stay on the ground where you have freedom of movement, utilizing structures as cover. I don't mean to go from martial law into, the more tactical situation, but if I believe that if it can happen, it will happen at some point or another. I'm not saying that martial law is a bad thing or is a good thing. It could go either way, should it happen. But if the people ain't having it, then that's the choice they make. And then there will be the reason for a full-scale mobilization of the military in order to deal with dissenters, rebels, and the like. Again, the whole thing is based on how long the supply chain is broken as to how people are going to act. If it's done smoothly and people are getting fed, people are getting water, people are getting clothed, people are getting back to work during, daylight hours, that kind of thing, then, which you got to keep in mind, this has all been done successfully in the past. It's not, it's all just got a different face on it now, that's all. Like I said, it's not necessarily a bad thing, but should the military do something like confiscate weapons. That probably wouldn't go over well. Do I think that my brothers in arms would follow through with an order like that? I don't know. The military has changed so much. It's not even funny. The older guys that are still in the service that fought during the Iraq and Afghanistan conflicts, and campaigns, I don't think they would. I don't think they'd confiscate weapons from civilians. The younger generation, because you got to remember, there's a whole generation of soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines, and Coast Guards that were maybe babies or not even born when 9/11 happened. They don't know a world like it was before. They don't know the United States the way it was before, when we all kind of had our eyes shut, so to speak. They don't know a world before YouTube. Or the internet, for that matter. This younger generation, it could go either way. Well, coming up on the 45-minute mark. Trying to think. The things that I had a list of things that I wanted to go over, like I said. Just some basic stuff like keeping gear dry and ways to do that when you pack your kit. And I was going to talk about rotating your ammunition to relieve spring tension in your magazines. And there was a little tidbit that I wanted to add to that, because I see a lot of not a lot of people, but I see some people that think they're real high speed and they like to flip their rifle to the side real fast to eject the magazine as they're pressing the magazine release button on their rifle, and it flings the magazine pretty far away from them, and then they just load the next magazine. Well, yeah, that's fast, But then you just lose your magazine. And what if you don't get resupply for a couple of days of ammo? And you got to pick up ammo on the go. What are you going to put the ammunition in? You just dumped your mag. You dropped your mag. Or even if you do get resupply and it doesn't come with magazines, then what are you going to put that ammunition in? Like, you see the high-speed guy, you know, shooting at a high rate of fire, you know, pop, 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 flip. Like, I mean, it looks cool. All right, that's great, you know, whatever. But it's not practical in an actual combat situation. It's not. Stow your magazines. Don't train like that. Now, if it's your last ditch effort and you're surrounded or something, then yeah, I could see that. You know, throwing your mags because you're not getting to a resupply point anyways. But under what would be considered more typical conditions where you're hopefully, you know, kicking ass and taking names, keep your mags so that you can continue to use them. Like, don't train to ditch your mag. You see these guys doing reflexive fire drills where they're walking up on the target and they're just letting gravity drop the magazine to the ground while they continue walking and load that magazine up. You can be just as fast and still save your magazine. Helps to have a drop mag pouch or dump pouch. There's it's just don't train that way. That's just ridiculous. Like, I know it's all high speed and hoo hoo, but it's not smart. You may be taking ammo off that guy and needing to resupply on the objective. Especially if it's a near peer threat and they're using the same ammunition as you. You know, instead of taking their entire weapon system and ammunition, they still have some. So it's just a little tactical thing to keep in mind. But rotating your ammo in your magazines every once in a while, pull all the ammo out of your mags, relieve spring tension in your magazine, and let them sit out for a while, and then cycle your ammo back through the magazines. It just adds some longevity to your magazines. Keeping gear dry can be as simple as getting a trash bag and throwing your gear in it before you put it in a bag. And you can tie it up, and then that way, if you're out on foot and you're walking around and it's raining, your equipment and gear stays dry inside whatever 3-day pack, 5-day pack, or whatever you got. So, and it could be you can get actual wet weather bags for gear. You know, they're more expensive than trash bags, but trash bags work fine. So yeah, I was just gonna do an episode or broadcast on just a few simple things, but um, I've been seeing all this stuff about martial law, and I thought it was prudent to make this about that. Um, it seems a lot of people are talking about it and discussing it and posting videos and stuff about it, but I think they're kind of missing the point. They're about the shock value in some cases rather than the, you know, uh, what does it mean to me kind of perspective. What is it that I'm going to have to deal with in my daily life under those conditions? What kind of decisions am I going to have to make? These are the things that everybody should be thinking about, not just the fact that, okay, it could happen. Yes, we all know it could happen. It could have happened during any emergency. We'll put it that way. Um, and 9 times out of 10, it doesn't happen. So we will see. We'll see if all these people on the web are like. Now, I say this, we'll see if they're right about it, because it could happen, but we'll see if they're wrong. You know, our country's pretty tough, and martial law didn't get put in place during 9/11. Now the military stood up, the government stood up, but they didn't use the military to take control of local governments across the country. Now they manage certain things like airports and stuff like that. We did come to somewhat of a standstill, but that wasn't martial law. So we'll see. We'll see what happens. All right, everybody. I think. Well, there's nobody here, but just me rambling. I think I'll call it a day. Out.